Please. Okay. All right. We are, no, cancel. Okay, it's being recorded.
Wonderful. Okay, Denny, thank you for attending our Master Gardener meeting and being our presentation speaker for this evening. Everyone else, we've had a slight change. Please welcome Denny from the Department of Forestry.
Yay.
Thanks for letting me slide into your Tuesday evening, no pun intended. I don't know whether you guys can see me or whether you can only see the PowerPoint presentation.
Both.
I think I've spoken before your group before. I know I've spoken before the birders, and it's been a while since I've been in front of the master naturalists, but this is a PowerPoint presentation I probably haven't used before. Oftentimes I just get up and kind of ad lib this talk, but I thought the PowerPoint might just give you another view into the agency and who we are. For over 32 years now, I've been a forester with the Department of Forestry, state agency in Virginia. And for all of those 32 years, we've continued to say how poorly we sell ourselves. And I think the fact is still true today. I mean, we have a little bit of a social media presence, but by and large, the number of Virginia landowners, even for that matter, that know that we exist and that we provide services, in their favor, are probably few and far between. And it's hard to change that dynamic. But one PowerPoint presentation at a time, maybe we'll get a little bit farther into the culture of Virginia. We have a couple of goals in Virginia, but first, to pursue those goals, our agency is rather small, even relative to other Virginia state agencies. When I started 32 years ago, our agency was 460 strong. And particularly in the early 2000s, our agency really went through a downsizing at the hand of a governor or two. And we were comprised of either foresters, 4-year degree employees, technicians, typically a 2-year degree. And then in a lot of the counties, we had a position under the title of warden. And those individuals were typically not necessarily college educated in any way, mostly homegrown, and usually very adept at mechanically inclined. Their responsibilities revolved around maintaining our equipment. And so, we were an agency that was pretty dynamic in terms of our personnel. And in the last 20 years, we've really gravitated towards the higher education technicians and foresters. And in the late 90s, early 2000s, we kind of, through attrition, got rid of that warden role. And the technicians today take on the handling of equipment and our primary first responder firefighter on the ground in the county, with the foresters providing backup in many cases, or most cases. In some cases, the forester takes the lead, depending on the experience level and the desire and willingness of the technician to do that. But we went from 460 to 230 in the span of about 20 years. And we've been sitting at about 230 employees for the last 10 or 15. Yet we do the same things we've always done. And we've added programs and services over the years. So we have a lot on our plate. We have a lot to do. Those goals include protecting the forest resource from wildfire, insects and diseases, and other natural disasters. Our agency was born and bred in 1914. So I did the math today. Our agency is about 111 years old. And the very first forester in 1914 was mandated on behalf of the state of Virginia as one individual to suppress wildland forest fires and to plant trees on denuded lands. And we're still doing those two things today. I'm a first responder. I work with, in conjunction with the local, either part-time, a volunteer or full-time paid fire departments um, towards suppressing wildland fire. And then when the fires sort of get beyond the reach of their hoses, that's where our wildland fire knowledge and experience and abilities kind of take over on their behalf and apply them accordingly. Conserving the forest land base. We've seen, in the last 50, 60 years, the forest land base in Virginia become quite a bit more fragmented, larger parcels being broken up into smaller parcels. We're very much invested in trying to maintain the forest land that Virginia has as forest land. And we'll go about that in several ways, as we'll get into in the PowerPoint. We're mandated by the governor to protect water quality. We do that primarily through our silvicultural water quality law that allows us to be able to influence activity on timber harvests and prevent erosion that could introduce sediment into Virginia's waterways. And then lastly, improve and renew forest resources. We're doing that not only by planting trees on cutover land, planting trees in open fields to create new forest land, but we're involved more and more in helping landowners influence the quality of their timberland through practices that are intermediate. For instance, one of the most common and really beneficial is to go into a 15-year-old clear cut that's regenerating naturally into hardwoods and finding white oak trees to release from their immediate competition such that they become dominant trees in the stand for the duration of the growth of that stand. And at age 15, when the trees are about the size of your forearm, we call them poles. That's a great time to find the white oak that are probably at that time struggling against their competition and probably would lose out the battle of competition with more aggressive or faster growing species like yellow poplar or red maple in particular. We find the white oak on about a 35 by 35 foot spacing. That comes out to 35 trees per acre. Really easy to remember. And we just released the white oak from its immediate 2 or 3 or 4 trees that are competing with the same crown. And that's an intermediate practice that allows us to ensure that white oak is maintained in and amongst the developing forests of Virginia that are younger. Our mission is to protect and develop healthy, sustainable forest resources for all Virginians. A common misconception is that our agency, that we are federal employees. We get accused a lot of being park rangers. And a lot of folks really kind of make the mistake of assuming that most of Virginia's forest is owned by the government, the national forests industry, and that's counter intuitive to the reality that we'll get to in a second. Our hardwoods our forests can be described in a lot of ways. They can be described in terms of their species composition. They can be described in terms of the population densities in Virginia, I think this map says more about maybe population densities as it does species composition. The eastern forests of Virginia are largely coastal plain and floodplain related, and that also tends to be the 95 corridor and the heaviest populated areas of Virginia. Richmond to DC, down into sort of the Rocky Mountain, North Carolina area along 95. The Shenandoah Valley is referred to as pastoral. That area has typically always been sort of heavily agricultural and livestock dominated. The breadbasket of forestry in Virginia is really in that yellow pine area, what we would call the Piedmont of Virginia. It's in loblolly pines native range, but we've sort of extended that range throughout the Piedmont to the foot slopes of the Blue Ridge Mountains, and maybe get to talking about some advancements in our ability to grow combined species of pine and in the mountains of Virginia. Floyd, Carroll, Grayson County is the white pine breadbasket of Virginia. White pine is still a pretty dominant market up there. And when you get beyond Grayson County, you're back into what's primarily hardwood dominated forests with some mountain pine associated with the oak, hickory, maple forests of southwestern Virginia. Getting into that timberland ownership and the misconception, though, almost 75% of all of Virginia's forests are owned by people like us, the workers, the business people, the service providers. It's people like us that own the majority of Virginia's forest land in some size and acreage. And that's why our agency exists. It's to assist, those 300,000 or more landowners who own maybe 5 acres or more of forest land that may take on a little bit more of a traditional forestry, rural forestry, sense or activity in particular. Our agency is here to ensure that Virginia's landowners can maintain their forest land in a state that is productive and perhaps relative to the economy of Virginia. And I don't think there's a slide in here necessarily that caters to that, but the forest industry in Virginia contributes to the tune of $30 billion a year to Virginia's economy. It's extremely important. It's the third leading contributor to the economy of Virginia, just behind tourism and agriculture. And so our goal is to try to help Virginia's landowners manage their forest land to meet their goals and objectives, but to also help ensure that those forests are being managed in such a way that when they mature, perhaps that asset will be liquidated and contribute towards this $30 billion a year economy that is the forest industry. You can see there about 10% of the forest is owned by forest industry. Companies like West Rock, and they go by a new name now. Pulp and paper company up in Covington, Clifton Forge area. There are a couple other large industry and forest owners in the coastal plain and eastern Piedmont part of Virginia, but those industries are sort of waning. The pulp and paper industry has sort of shifted to Asia and those markets. Of course, the tariffs and the export of logs has been dramatically affected in the last year or two or three, and our local economy has been dramatically affected by a reduction in log prices and timber stumpage prices. So, but a lot of that industry land, in the last 20 to 30 years has been sold off, much of it purchased by large timber management investment companies, real estate companies, or broken up and fragmented into smaller parcels and maybe owned by private landowners today. And then you can see about 10% in Virginia, forest land owned by the U.S. Forest Service, the U.S. National Park Service. Those two agencies could be referred to in terms of the federal ownership. And then my primary responsibility in our area is to work with landowners individually. one of my roles is to write management plans for landowners to help them meet their goals and objectives. In particular, I'd say probably in the 30 years I've been doing this, more than 50% of landowners come to us without an interest in liquidating their asset, harvesting timber. Very few people purchase land towards that end game or that purpose. It becomes sort of a reality through ownership, however, and becomes very beneficial, a very beneficial option as landowners purchase land and then get later in life and either have debt to pay off or have medical bills or parents to take care of. I mean, that's kind of why we see those assets being liquidated when they're done so too early. It's generally to generate income that's in demand by the landowner for one reason or another. Bring those plans to fruition, whether it's growing deer with bigger antlers and attracting more wildlife, or whether it's simply maintaining a healthy forest. Those are things that we can do. And in the case of wildlife habitat enhancement and wildlife management, it really kind of goes hand in hand, because one of the best things you can do for wildlife to create what they need is a diversity of habitat types, is to create openings in the forest, early successional forest, browse, bedding habitat. And so forest activity oftentimes complements and enhances presence of wildlife. That's something that's a little counterintuitive to most Virginians, probably. We have several cost share programs that allow us to offset the investment a landowner would make to establish new forest land in place of forest that's been cut or harvested. And I can talk about those specifically if there's an interest. Primarily, it's tree planting and the planting of pine. However, we're now providing cost share assistance to do things like crop tree release, the practice that I described earlier, where you go into a 15-year-old clear cut and find white oak and release white oak. Those are expensive practices, several $100s per acre in some cases. And so we're providing incentives for landowners to be encouraged to participate and practice those by offsetting the costs through cost share programs. And then, there's some other great resources out there. Virginia Cooperative Extension in particular, Jennifer Gagnon's Virginia Landowner Assistance Program is a tremendous resource. You can find their 15 minutes in the forest, a Friday product that has more than probably 30 or 50 products out there to view, that run the gamut from forest management to wildlife to, non-traditional forest products and things like that. I throw a few slides in here just to make conversation. I like to talk a lot when I sit down with a landowner or walk the property with them or on their behalf. One of the first things I'm looking at is sort of a view into the history of the property and how it's been managed in the past. And if you're observant enough to see whether trees are either the product of a single seed and exist in the forest as a single stem, or perhaps in the case of this slide, where you have a rather old stump sprout clump. This forest was once harvested and allowed to regenerate naturally. And around the circumference of the stump, maybe even 25 to 50 sprouts developed at the time of the growing season following the first harvest. And those 30 or 50 or more sprouts competed with each other for site resources, just like trees in the forest compete with one another. And in the long run, in this case, 4 stems around the circumference of the stump persisted. And we refer to this as, a forester refers to this as coppice growth. That's the technical term, but it's purely stump sprouts that dominated through development. And this is not the ideal situation. So the first thing you might notice is that all 4 of those stems are rather small. As a forester, I'd rather the next forest be produced through acorns and other seeds that would germinate and develop into a single seedling and a single stem. And if you can imagine the stump and the root system that produce these sprouts, and then the 4 sprouts that persist into maturity, had all of this biomass, all of this cellulose had been contributed to one stem instead of 4 stems, we'd have a much larger diameter tree and probably a much better quality tree in terms of form and growth habits. When trees grow in tight space like this, their crowns tend to be thin. Obviously, health and vigor is a concern when trees are spaced this close together and competing with one another for site resources, nutrients, water, and sunlight. And this coppice growth response really affects the development of the stand, in the first 30 years in particular. And so in that crop tree release practice that I referred to, now twice in this presentation, we would have preferred to have gotten into this stand at age 15 and limited the ability of these stump sprouts to outcompete the single stem trees that were developing from the acorns and the seed on the ground. But the unfortunate thing is that stump sprout clump has a dramatic improvement. A dramatic competitive edge over all of the single seed stems for having that established root system. The stump sprouts are very fast growing. And if you've ever had a chance to look into a clear cut of any age 1, 2, 3, 4 years of age, you'll see the dominance of stump sprouts and stump sprout clumps over all of the other vegetation that's responding in a clear cut. And it's one of the real dire needs in forest management post harvest is to get into these stands before age 15 or 20 and mitigate the ability of these stump sprout clumps to dominate. And the real dramatic effect is limited growth potential towards maturity, whatever that age might be for the stand, and the fact that so many of your stems are limited in terms of their potential, by their neighboring stump sprouts. So I just thought I'd throw that in there for conversation's sakes. Here's a yellow poplar that had a similar situation where 2 stems persisted and they grew to quite, appreciable size and diameter, but that crotch in the middle is a weak point. And if you can imagine looking up at the crowns of these 2 trees, all of the crown on the stem to the right is on the outside right side, and all of the crown of the tree on the left is on the upper left side. So the trees are very heavily weighted away from each other and away from that crotch. And that crotch is an area of bark to bark. And as those trees have grown in diameter and the bark closes together, that never becomes a wood to wood or a xylem to xylem connection. It's always a bark to bark. And then as moisture gets down in there, you end up having rot and decay. And we oftentimes see failure. And this is really relevant in an urban environment when we have ice storms in particular. These two trees or trees in this certain circumstance oftentimes fail, and either one stem falls away or both stems fall away from each other due to that awkward weighted crown to the outside. And then if you add grapevines or some other vine in the boughs of the tree and the crown that adds unnecessary weight, those trees are even more likely to fail. Our agency, as I said, we're a longtime wildland fire suppression agency. Before the snow came, I responded to a 1.5 acre to a 3 acre fire in Cave Spring on a Thursday afternoon. Spent the entire night on the fire as it was in proximity to 4 or 5, $500,000 homes. Put a crew on it the next day, and that's been our normal, to have wintertime fire seasons. It's been so dry. We're in the middle of a drought. This snow and ice and moisture, its persistence on the ground is going to go a long ways towards moderating our early spring fire season in February. But we have 2 fire seasons in Virginia, spring and fall, and both seasons, have been rather busy. And this spring was anticipated to be pretty busy with the drought leading us into the winter months. Hopefully, we'll get some more rain, get some more snow, because we're still in a drought and need it all. But we take our fire wildland experience and apply it also towards managing primarily early successional habitats. So I'm going to show you a picture or two of some prescribed burning that we've done. And this is a property some of you might even be familiar with. If I get a chance to speak about the landowner as an individual. But we help the USDA. A lot of these landowners are involved in cost share programs through the Natural Resource Conservation Service. NRCS is the acronym for that agency. A lot of landowners get involved in growing habitats for wildlife, and they come in really 2 forms. One is either a pollinator habitat, and this is one of those, or a warm season grass. And pollinator habitats tend to have an awful lot of blue stem and Indian love grass, warm season grasses in them as a natural fit. And so these habitats, if allowed to go on for any time without some kind of disturbance, would simply just entertain volunteer trees and slowly and gradually become forest again. So in order to maintain these habitats as early successional, we introduce fire once every 3 to 5 years if we can, if there's not too much in the way of proximity to nearby residents and landowners that would be opposed to the practice and the smoke that the practice generates. We maintain these practices through periodic burning, and we try not to do it any more frequently than 3 years, and we'll put it off as many as 5 years if we can. A lot of that's just pure eyeballing the stand for volunteer trees and making that decision on an as-need basis. But our resources come in really handy to apply and provide this service to landowners. We charge about $30 an acre for this if we don't have to put the fire lines in ourselves. And you can see basically the neighbor's nearby yard is more or less holding this fire on one side. We'll surround these areas with down to dirt, bare mineral soil fire line if needed, in order to contain it on any side that requires it. To install those fire lines, we might use our bulldozer and charge the landowner $100 an hour to install those lines. But by and large, landowners typically have the discs or plows or tools and equipment to put in their own fire lines to help us provide these services to them with as little cost out of pocket as possible. Quite a few laws in Virginia. I've got a badge. I call myself the Barney Fife of the law enforcement world. I don't even have a bullet in one pocket. Our laws are enforced basically without our wardens carrying a firearm, but I have the ability to write a summons for quite a few of these laws, the law violations, primarily to just prevent fire. In particular, this slide kind of shows a little bit more towards the Virginia State Forester's responsibilities relative to our mandated law enforcement responsibilities. Control of forest reserves and funds, reforestation, conservation of timber. I mean, our general fund probably allows us to be able to do a lot of those things without impacting the taxpayer any more than they're accustomed to on an annual basis. We're able to perform our duties without the liability of trespass. It gives us the ability to basically walk onto a property without permission. Although as a courtesy, we always try to contact the landowner, even if it's a matter of walking up to the doorstep and knocking on the door before doing so. We don't want to throw our weight around, despite sort of being given the right to. We have 3 state nurseries in the state of Virginia that grow trees in particular for our reforestation efforts and in support of that those cost share programs. We can provide seedlings mostly at cost and the technical assistance that goes along with establishing forests for one of many reasons. One of those I haven't talked about is riparian buffers, establishing forests along Virginia's stream, creeks, and rivers where they don't currently exist, having forests protecting the banks of and shading our Virginia streams, creeks, and rivers is of a huge value and benefit. And we're always trying to add to the mileage of streams, creeks, and rivers that are afforded forest cover. We do have a board of forestry that are all appointed individuals, and they sort of oversee the agency's mission, goals, and objectives, and services provided. And a specific board that oversees our reforestation of timberlands program and the money that's afforded to that program in support of reforestation efforts in Virginia. And maybe the best analogy is in Franklin County, where it's again, Franklin County, Bedford County are really part of the westernmost breadbasket of forestry in Virginia. And forests are basically now turned over every 25 to 30 years purely for pulpwood. And so there's a large fund of money that is provided to provide those incentives to landowners to reforest. And in some cases, and this may be the slide that refers to the law that supports reforestation. First law that's discussed here is our open air burning law. A lot of people call it a burn ban, but it's not really a burn ban. It's a law that's in place from February through April 30th. And it basically says the reason for that is that after temperatures begin to subside or drop, the humidities begin to go up and the winds tend to subside. And those 3 things allow us better favor in terms of responding to fires if they occur. And fires are less likely to get out from a controlled burn situation in the afternoon or evening. So we prefer, and by law, require people not do any burning until after 4 p.m. in the afternoon or evening. It's also illegal to leave a fire unattended. Both of these laws really apply to a certain distance from any kind of a dry fuel type. For the 4 p.m. law, it's a 300 feet from brush, dry grassy field, any kind of fuel that's capable of carrying a fire across the landscape. You have to be at least 300 feet from any fuel type in order to be able to burn during the day before 4 p.m. And if you're within 150 feet of woods, brushland, dry grassy field, any kind of fuel capable of carrying fire across the landscape, it's unlawful to leave that fire unattended. And I have the ability to write a state summons just like you would get on the interstate from a state trooper for violations of that state law. And when a fire does escape, as is the case of the Cave Spring fire on Thursday night a week ago, I can write a summons and a ticket that affords me the ability to get the landowner into the court system to ensure that they pay our suppression costs. And now that fire on Thursday, despite only being 3.5 acres, is going to cost that landowner a little over $2,000 as I've added up the cost to date. And that's primarily through the firefighters that we had on the ground to suppress the fire, catch it, and bring it under control and hold it in place until the snow came on Saturday afternoon, thankfully. We do attempt to try to collect suppression costs on all fires that are caused by a responsible party. We get quite a bit of an investigative knowledge and experience to pursue the responsible party. It's amazing to me how often the responsible party is reluctant to step forward and admit guilt, but it happens a lot. And so that experience and that knowledge and training has come in pretty handy in my experience. We try to communicate, and our local weather stations are tremendous about communicating high fire danger on warm, dry, windy days, whether they be spring or fall or even midwinter when fire danger is high. I'm always pleasantly surprised to turn on the news. And for lack of my involvement, our weathermen are really knowledgeable of forest fire danger and willing to discuss it on the air. The seed tree law is that law that really kind of requires a landowner to reforest if their previous forest prior to harvest was comprised of more than 25% white pine or loblolly pine amongst the dominant trees. Law actually allows us to require the landowner to replant if they weren't already so inclined to do that. I've had very few instances where I had to apply this law. In most cases, if the landowner weren't knowledgeable about it, upon being educated about the value, well, obviously they've liquidated the asset, so they're aware of the value of the asset, particularly if they went through proper channels to sell their timber. And if I would love it if somebody would ask me about that at the end of the talk. But there is a law that states you have to provide for the trees to provide for the next forest, or in lieu of planting trees, you need to leave seed trees, and that would be 8 trees per acre that are large, dominant crown canopy trees to provide the seed that would be needed and beneficial towards regenerating the stand naturally back to that pine that was present at the time of harvest. And the landowner can sign an alternate management plan if they have some other idea for using the land and the property towards some other use other than forestry. A picture too, just to make conversation, a fire that I responded to in the New River Valley between Blacksburg and Newport. There's a shooting range on the National Forest there, and volunteers and I were the first to respond long before the owners, the National Forest land, arrived. This fire burned basically towards the back. The smoke, as you can see, is leaning towards the east with a westerly influence. But this fire kind of ran back behind the smoke to the top of the ridge and became about a 10-acre fire and required us to spend the better part of a day or two on it. A lot of our work's done at nighttime. I talked about the 4 p.m. law and the reason why we would prefer people burn later in the afternoon and evening. We accomplish a lot of our best firefighting and fire line construction at nighttime when the fire activity wanes due to lower temperatures and higher humidities and less wind on the landscape. And so we've always been an agency that has been very aggressive at nighttime firefighting and taking advantage of those factors and those circumstances that are in our favor, mostly at nighttime. I've talked a lot about timber harvesting. There is a law in Virginia that requires loggers to notify our agency. That gives our inspectors, myself and the technicians, an opportunity to visit the site in the first 10 days of activity to decide whether or not water quality is going to be a concern as a function of the way the land lays, and then make repeated visits every 30 to 45 days in order to keep an eye on those circumstances. And in the case of sediment, either reaching a stream, creek, or river, or if we see the possibility of that to develop, we have the ability to basically shut down the logging job and require the logger to do certain mitigation practices to ensure that that sediment doesn't move off site and get into a scour ditch line where it can make its way into one of Virginia's waterways. This was over in the Cave Spring area. This is not forestry. Somebody might see this and say, oh, we get blamed for this a lot, I guess is what I'm saying. This is not forestry. This is development. This is urban progress. This is a subdivision that's going in. I wish I could remember the name of the road that kind of runs between Cave Spring Middle School and Sugarloaf, kind of in the North Cave Spring, Hidden Valley area. But, people see trees being cut and the land being stumped and the land being converted to some other practice. That's not forestry. Forestry is growing trees and maintaining forest land. And when we harvest 10 acres of forest land or 100 acres of forest land in Virginia, that forest is already ripe and ready and resilient and capable of regenerating itself. So this is one of the misconceptions that I like to try to mend when I'm given the opportunity to speak to people, because we get blamed for an awful lot of unsightly things that are not really forestry. We do provide harvest assistance to landowners and to loggers to help arrive at their goals and objectives, and to help the loggers in particular, avoid running into problems with water quality law violations. Um, we don't do a lot of thinning of hardwoods in Virginia. It's really not, it's really counterproductive towards growing. The two most valuable trees in Virginia from an economic standpoint are yellow poplar and white oak. Both of those trees are sun-loving trees. They really need full sunlight for the seeds to germinate and for the seeds to develop into seedlings and saplings into poles, and to have hundreds, if not thousands, of stems per acre, all growing towards the same end of becoming dominant trees in the stand. And it's that competition that forces those young trees to grow straight and tall, and in 50 or 100 or 150 years become straight, well-formed, and quality stems of value. And so I've always been fighting the landowners' misconception that let me make this statement first. We all love trees for all different kinds of reasons, many of them the same. And so as a landowner, we understand that trees are good for all of these reasons, all these things we learned about in school. And so we grow up thinking that if trees are so good and valuable for all of these benefits, cutting a tree must be bad. And when we become landowners as adults, and then we become knowledgeable about the value of trees, and we decide to liquidate the asset, we decide rather than liquidate the whole asset and wind up with a clear cut, we decide to apply what most people would call a selective harvest. A selective harvest is sort of a commercial thinning, if you will, where the trees that are removed are valuable. They tend to be the most valuable trees. My experience as a forester has been when somebody applies the selective harvest mentality, they're essentially giving the logger carte blanche access to their forest land. And the loggers take the trees that are valuable, they leave the trees that are not valuable. And those trees that are left because they're either undesirable species, trees with no value, trees with poor form and poor quality. And that forest persists for another 50, 100, or 200 years. And so the practice of selective harvesting, what I would call a high grade, taking the best and leaving the rest, has actually denuded Virginia's forest land tremendously, even throughout my 30-year career. And it's simply for lack of the knowledge of proper and recommended forest practices. But if you go back to that idea of loblolly, also as a pine, but white oak and yellow poplar being sun-loving trees, they need full sunlight for the seeds to germinate and for the seed to develop into saplings and poles and so on. We need the environment of a clear cut and full sunlight for those trees to be able to become established and to do that. In order to get to that end game of a properly harvested forest, we're not allowed to value forest land for landowners. That would be considered a conflict of interest. So what we do is provide a list of forest consultants to Virginia landowners. A forest consultant is much like, I'm going to end my talk here in just a minute, but the analogy is if you were going to sell a home of great value, you wouldn't make the mistake of trying to sell it yourself and cost yourself money in doing so. So you go out and you find a real estate agent who's going to help you see highest fair market value for your home, given the certain circumstances of today's marketplace. Well, with Virginia's forest land being able to generate sometimes $4,000 or $5,000 an acre, multiply that by 10 or 100 acres, it's a tremendous value. And you would be you'd be making a mistake to not apply the knowledge and expertise of a professional forest consultant who basically sells the timber on behalf of the landowner, helping them arrive at the greatest fair market value possible based on today's marketplace, at a commission. And that commission is generally around 10 to 14% of the sale price. But that commission is minimal relative to the added value that they bring, in terms of the ability of the landowner to see an income at the end of a timber harvest, relative to trying to negotiate the sale of their timber with a logger. It'd be like trying to buy a house with no knowledge or experience of selling homes, whatsoever. You'd end up giving up a tremendous amount of value. I had, quite a few more slides. This is an example of what we're trying to avoid: bare mineral soil that's inclined to run off the landscape. Instead, we'd like to see a logger apply the debris that's generated from a timber harvest and put it down on the ground of the skid trails to keep the skid trails high on the ground, off the soil, not in contact with the soil, and not doing any degradation to the soil, even minimally, along the skid trails where they would make a pass. This is a great example of the value of applying the debris that's generated in a timber harvest to keep the skidders off the ground. We provide that reforestation assistance that I described earlier. It doesn't apply to most of you guys watching the show tonight. We typically do most of our tree planting in the spring, February and March. We're getting ready to do that right now. Again, we're getting ready to jump into our spring fire season, February and March. Generally, by the middle of March, the fields are starting to green up, and they're taken out of play relative to wildland fire. And then for the next month, March and April, maybe even a little bit of May, until the leaves come out on the trees and the trees completely foliate, we're involved in our spring fire season. When those dry cold fronts come through with very little moisture, they typically will drive fires across the landscape. Most of our biggest fires in Virginia tend to be wind-driven events, like the one in Pennsylvania County almost 20 years ago now, that burned over several hundred acres and threatened homes throughout Virginia's landscape. So with that, I went about 45 minutes, almost perfect. And let's see if I can figure out how to close this screen and show
Does
presenter
anybody
view.
have any questions? I want to know something. Are you working with the 85 expansion? I mean, not 85, 81 expansion?
So, I mean, the 81 expansion is going, into the interior, the median, and it's probably going out to the shoulders, by some distance, 50 feet, maybe 100 feet. I don't really know what the plan is. To answer your question, the Department of Transportation has to bring us into the fold, basically to review the impacted forest land. But for all intents and purposes, there are contractors that are going to bring those trees down. Oftentimes, if the contractor is smart and sees the value inherent in the volume that is brought to the ground, hopefully that wood goes to some marketplace, whether it's a pulp and paper mill or a sawmill. But, we don't have the ability to demand or dictate that happen. And,
So
the material's
essentially
removed. It's not
pumping.
burned there on site next to the highway, right? It's taken off site in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
To answer your question, we're not really involved other than kind of a formality is really all it is.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. That was really nice. I learned a lot.
Frankie, I have a question.
Yay.
Yeah, thank you for that presentation. That was very interesting, and thank you for the work that you and all the other foresters do. I know
Yes.
that one problem that you are battling, just like the rest of us, is the problem of invasive plants in our forests.
Yes, ma'am.
Can you give us a sense of how the Department of Forestry is addressing invasive plants in the forest and how you address it with landowners?
Well, through education and outreach, And when I write a management plan, the one thing that every property has in common with all the rest is the presence of invasive species. So for the landowner that only owns 1 acre or 5 acres, really it comes down to shame on them for, number one, not knowing. You can't hold them but so much, liable for that. But there is a little bit of cost share out there for the larger landowner, mostly through Natural Resource Conservation Service cost share programs, to pay a contractor to come into a property and treat and remove invasive species. So we're better at doing it on a large scale, but only on a few properties. And as you drive around Virginia, you drive into Bath County and Warm Springs and Highland County, the mountain forest land is overrun with Asiatic bittersweet in particular. And that seed bed is in place so that when you harvest the timber, it's going to be a problem as the next forest, regenerates naturally.
Yeah.
So it's a commonality. I think what really needs to happen, I kind of thought it was going to happen with a bunch of money that was made available from the federal government to states and trickle down to local municipalities. What it's really going to take, and I think our local PRISM groups are going to have a large role in this. But what it's going to take is counties are going to need a staff. Municipalities are going to need a person in place or a staff to begin treating our invasive species from our populated, centers, moving outward. And that funding's not there, as you all know. I mean, we don't have those people in place at the moment for lack of funding, mostly, and it's already too late. But it's going to take maybe the taxpayers in Virginia to demand that this become a priority, and that money be made available in support of the staff that's going to be expected and required, to make the observations in the field and to apply knowledge, skills, and experience towards, reduction of invasives and removal, and really treatment with herbicides, because all of these things come back if you don't kill the root system.
Yeah.
Asiatic bittersweet in particular is easy to pull out of the ground, pretty shallow rooted, but there's so many others to speak about, that properties need to be dealt with, in terms of acreages, 10 acres, 20 acres at a time. And the Natural Resource Conservation Service has the funding to help landowners begin to tackle that, on a landowner basis on larger properties, at least anyway.
Yeah. So true.
I know I've been a part of Blue Ridge PRISM for a while now. And is the Department of Forestry able to weigh in on the bills that are currently before the legislature to continue to ratchet down the sale of invasive plants?
Well, I mean, you would think the industry would be able to self-regulate, I don't know if the problem really in the legislature and with government, or is it with the individuals that keep demanding that the nurseries, purchase this product? It blows my mind to still see barberry and Nandina, going into landscapes, in Roanoke, but it's still there, and it's because people are demanding it. So it's a tough problem to tackle.
Yeah, I guess so.
Well, we're trying to get them outlawed step by step. I wish it were faster, but we're working on it. Thank you for your response.
Right.
Thank you very much.
Very welcome. Glad to do it. I don't know how to get myself back on the screen, but
Here,
Frankie, we
let
have
me
two more questions.
go for
we
it.
do? Okay.
There we go.
Donna, would you like to go?
Yes, thank you, Jessica. Denny, thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. It was really
welcome.
educational, at least for me.
Good.
I learned a lot about your department. So I'm gonna ask a question from a perspective of a homeowner with a huge old white pines that are planted in a close proximity to the house, maybe like less than 50 feet. So what would be your recommendation? Should I keep the trees or should I cut them down?
White pine are pretty resilient as long as they look healthy. You know,
Mm-hmm.
if they're starting to yellow, if you're starting to see dieback, that's the big thing to look for in trees and forest ownership is branch dieback. If you see branch dieback in the crown, that's an indication that there's something really troubling going on underground in the root system. The root system's starting to wane and give, and so naturally part of the crown has to be given up. If you can age your white pine generally grow pretty well to about age 40 to 60. But also as white pine get older, they're more prone to a heart rot. And that's a tree weakening from the interior to the outside. And so it's invisible. You can't really see that rot in the center of the tree. So make sure there are no vines, to add weight during ice and snowstorms. Think about proximity to the home. If they're within falling distance, there's a risk and a liability there that probably really needs to be exercised with an urban tree company like Bartlett. And Bartlett's the best in our area. They have the tools to be able to sort of look interior to the tree and see if there's any heart rot. Right. So I'm not able to make an observation. My agency ties my hands from a risk and liability standpoint.
Yeah.
I'm not able to do risk and hazard assessments. And when I'm looking at a tree, I'm always gonna, and so is the tree service company. They're always gonna err on the side of risk and liability and takedown. And if a tree is within falling distance of a structure, an improvement, it probably needs to be considered for takedown just because that risk and liability is there. And only Mother Nature's going to, dictate whether it come into play or not. And it's our job to take it out of play, even if it's an extreme cost. Now, the one thing I do oftentimes is share a list of portable sawmillers. If the trees are larger than 12 inches in diameter, they're essentially in saw timber size and range. And so there's some value there that may be able to be exercised if you can find the right person, the right logger or the right contractor to help you take advantage. And in that case, it's almost probably a good form on your part to be willing to give the trees away, to have them taken down at no cost, because almost every tree within falling distance of a home, there's risk and liability, and then therefore there's a cost to take down. Yeah. So the real trick is trying to figure out how to find a way to have the trees taken down and absorb some of that cost. And one of the ways to do that is to have a portable sawmiller come set up on site and take the trees down and have them sawn into dimension lumber on site, or just taken off property and sawn to dimension lumber. And maybe some of that value can even be shared with you. But in most cases, I'd be willing to give up that value just to have it done, as opposed to have to pay thousands of dollars for tree takedown, which is oftentimes the case.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Any more?
I have one question. What's the forestry department doing about either Bradford pears that are creeping off into the forest, or I guess they're converting to calorie pears?
Interestingly, you don't see a lot of calorie pear in the forest. They're able to move into the transition into the forest edge for having that available sunlight, but you just don't see it growing in the understory, which means what? It's a very shade intolerant tree. What do we find in the understory? We find red maple and sugar maple and black gum and white pine. Those trees are very shade tolerant. Calorie pear is one of those things that would be top of the list on Roanoke County and Roanoke City's list of species to manage against, right?
Yeah.
And especially in North County around the airport and Peters Creek, it's so prevalent. But again, it's going to require not only mechanical means, it's going to require chemical treatment. And so we're going to have to understand, that we may have to concede some of our, predetermined issues with herbicides if we're really going to want to manage against some of these aggressive species.
Yeah.
I have a quick question if we still have time.
Please.
Yeah.
Denny, my husband and I had you out like to our property in Craig County a couple years ago.
You're on my list of things to do.
Okay. And so we've been heeding your advice and trying
Yep.
to clear out some of the sadder, older, crustier trees, particularly the red oak. But in doing so, we've noticed that like even in the white and red oak, these like, not huge trees are rotten in winter.
Yeah.
And we're concerned, like, how do we choose a tree? Like, is there any clue that it's going to be rotten in the center, or is it just sort of like you take it down and you hope for the best?
Well, so for you in particular, like the site's an issue, right? The soil, it's a poor soil. It's a poor site. It doesn't grow great hardwoods to begin with. The red oak is kind of waning. Number one, it's not red oak in general. It's scarlet oak. So scarlet oak is the shortest lived of all of the oak species. And we get a lot of calls about large mature oak trees dying, right? Well, in many cases, most cases, it's scarlet oak that's just reached its biological potential. Whether it be age 90 or 120 or 150, it varies from site to site and soil from soil. But scarlet oak has the shortest lifespan and biological potential on any soil, on any site, and it's more limited, where your property is, just due to a very infertile soil. We probably need to get together and walk again, and my plan will help a little bit. Your plan is like the second one I'm going to write when I get the chance to sit down and write. That's my real challenge. I only write about 4 or 5 or 6 plans a year because it requires like 4 or 6 hours of sitting and nonstop writing, and I just don't get that much time. But what I would say is, let's you and me and Rachel, the Roanoke County Forester, let's walk it together and talk it again.
Yeah,
I'd really rather see you working in the understory against the red maple and some of the less desirable invasive species.
We don't have anything. It's just
Good.
the oak and some hickory. There's like literally no understory, I guess, because of deer pressure. But
Right.
yeah. Anyways, I was curious about the rot, so thank you.
We'll tackle that one together soon, hopefully.
Okay.
Nice to see you.
Good. Yeah, same.
Thanks again.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, let's take a break, about 10-minute break, and go get some tea.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Bye, Denny.
Bye,
Thanks
thank you.
again.
Denny, that was really good.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.
And there you go. So where's Jess? Jess, you want to go first? Yep.
Okay. But we have until 7:15, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
We don't have a lot, actually.
I don't know.
There's just a lot of words.
But I didn't know how to. Start video.
I should go check to see if the package arrived. You want to go? Do you want to go? I'll be right back. I'm gonna go check it. Huh? We'll go check it.
Oh.
Ah, yes. All right. We good? There, we good. All right. Here we go. Right. You gonna stay there? Huh? You gonna stay there? Oops, I can't get up. Here, let's get this. Okay? Yeah. Da-da-da-da-da-da. Okay, I think I'm almost there. Yes. All right. I just don't want to sit on the dogs. Okay. There you go. Lay down here. So Donna, um, did you get any responses from the email that you put out?
No, but I wanted to talk to everybody tonight about it.
Good deal. Sounds
Yep.
good.
Okay.
I like your earrings.
They're snowflakes.
I know. I like them.
Thanks.
Gotta watch it. They might be hanging in my closet. Oh, geez. So I heard tell that it was supposed to snow this evening. Did you?
Last
Yeah.
I heard, we're only
Ah,
we'll see what happens.
yeah. I'm just getting tired of taking ice off the car.
Hmm. For sure.
Mm.
Ah, been a long day. Oh, shoot. Oh, there it is. The
Frankie, will you be sharing the agenda on your screen then?
No, I don't have it up, but I got it in front of me.
Hmm.
Everybody should have a copy. Ah. Is that your fake bookcase?
Yeah.
I really like it.
Thanks.
Is everybody back?
I'm here. You
I
can hear me.
see.
I'm here. Yes, Betty is back.
Yay, Betty. Okay, let's see. All right.
Who's taking our meeting minutes?
I'm sorry.
Who is taking our meeting minutes?
Um, AI.
Okay.
Oh, wait, I have to turn what happened here?